Howdy my totally as always Tubular gamers, we're back with, you guessed it, yes I know you guessed it, another video. Shocking, I know. But don't worry, today's video is going to be a fun one. We're going to be talking about 10 out of 10 3D platformers. Now, I've made it no secret on my channel that I love 3D platformers. It's one of my favorite genres of them all. This genre's been around for like 30 years now, and there are plenty of stellar titles. It really is an entire rabbit hole that you could fall into, but for today's video, I thought I would be talking about the cream of the crop, the illustrious 10 out of 10 3D platformers. Now, 10 out of 10 can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I'll share what it means to me. A 10 out of 10 means I can give it my absolute highest recommendation. A 10 out of 10 does not mean it's a perfect video game. A perfect video game does not exist. Every single one of these games that I'm talking about today, I could point out an issue, a flaw, a connotation, something wrong with it, etc, etc. It just means that if I'm going to recommend a 3D platformer to you, this is one of the 3D platformers I'm going to recommend to you first. This is all purely based off of my own experience, and so with that, let's get started with this list. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Major shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you very much. Love ya. Alright, let's get to the first game. Alright, you knew I had to start this list with a Mario game. Of course, when you're talking about the best 3D platformers of all time, you gotta start with a Mario game, and so we're starting with Mario Odyssey. I don't think this game needs all that much of an explanation, especially by now. The Switch has been around for quite a while now, and everybody knows that Mario Odyssey is one of the very best games on it. But not only is Mario Odyssey one of the best Switch games and one of the best Mario games, but truly one of the greatest 3D platformers of them all. Mario has arguably the best control and moveset he's ever had in a 3D setting in this game. He feels amazing to control. The controls are incredibly tight, responsive, snappy, and feel just ridiculously refined. And then when it comes to his moveset itself, it's actually really great also. Not only does he have just a number of different moves, but he also has Cappy, and Cappy allows for more advanced platforming and of course getting thrown onto enemies so then you can become that enemy, giving Mario even more abilities. This game is one of the most creative video games ever made. Every single level is an absolute joy to play from start to finish. All of the levels are wildly different from each other, each with their own unique gimmicks, ideas, and concepts that really come to fruition to create just something special every single time. The game looks fantastic, it runs incredibly well, there's a ton of variety, and then the game is absolutely massive when it comes to its collectibles. What I've always really loved about Mario Odyssey is that the game really is as long as you want it to be. If you want to just get the bare minimum amount of moons so that you can then go on to the next level and eventually fight some incredible bosses, the game isn't all that long. You could probably finish it in around 10 hours, but if you really want to take your time with this game, you want to try to get a lot of the moons or maybe all of the moons, oh, you can easily triple your playtime. You're going to get a lot of time out of this, and I think it's worth going for as many moons as you feel like getting because the game is just an absolute blast. There isn't a lot of Switch games I've come back to after I've finished them, but this is one I've come back to several times, and that's just because the game really is one of the greatest games of all time. I genuinely believe that, and I think when it comes to 3D platformers, it doesn't get a whole lot better than Mario Odyssey. Alright, so for this entry, I got a double header. I got a double creature feature. We got Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie. Now, I know a lot of people prefer one game over the other, but I love both of these games and I could easily give both of them a 10 out of 10. Not only are both of them some of my favorite video games of all time, but I think they're some of the best 3D platformers ever. And I love both of them for very similar reasons. Both of them control incredibly well. They control virtually identical, and I love their base moveset. What's really cool is as you play through either game, their moveset actually really expands and you get a lot of abilities. And Banjo-Tooie doesn't just see you getting all of the abilities from the first game again. No, you actually get to keep everything from the first game and you learn even more new abilities, which was something I always really loved. Something else I've really loved from both games is their sense of humor and their charm. The original game certainly has a bit more charm. Banjo-Tooie's a lot darker, but both of them have great senses of humor, from Gruntilda making fun of Banjo to all of the unhinged wacky shit that's in Banjo-Tooie. Speaking of unhinged wacky shit, we got the levels. The levels in Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie are some of the best levels of any 3D platformer. Banjo-Kazooie, oh yeah, they're all fantastic levels, from Mumbo's Mountain to Freezeezy Peak. You won't find a bad one here, straight up. And then when it comes to Banjo-Tooie, while I know they're not everybody's cup of tea, I don't really think there's a bad level here outside of Grunty Industries. But outside of that one level, I think all of the levels are great in Banjo-Tooie also, and they do something really different from Banjo-Kazooie. They could have easily just kind of replicated the worlds from Kazooie, but no, these are really expansive, grand, and I love how they all interconnect. And I even like the backtracking aspect. I know that's not for everybody, but I like the backtracking aspect. I love collecting things in this game. I think both of these games have a great amount of collectibles, and they do a good job of making everything feel important, unlike Donkey Kong 64 where there's just way too much shit. Here, it's very manageable. And the biggest thing was, it was just fun to collect everything. I have always tried to collect everything when I play through these games, and it's always just such a great time. You know what else helps is the music. The music in Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie really is just goated. Like, it is absolutely fantastic. I love these games' presentations, the story, the vibe, the music, the level design, the sense of exploration, the sense of progression you get with Banjo and Kazooie themselves. And there's a reason that these two are some of the finest 3D platformers ever, and if you like one more than the other, that's totally fine. We can all agree that both of these are way better than Nuts and Bolts, and it's also great to see that these games are still available on modern platforms, and I very much recommend both of them. Alright, you knew I couldn't go very long in this list without including a Sonic game. Now, as much as people love to rag on Sonic, there are some really great Sonic games, but when choosing one for this list, I knew I had to choose Sonic Generations X Shadow Generations. It was either this or Sonic Adventure 2, but I'm going with Sonic Generations with Shadow Generations. Now, Sonic Generations by itself was already a fantastic game, a great celebration of Sonic's history, with some really excellently designed levels, fantastic control, really the best gameplay Sonic's ever had in 3D. And the game has a great sense of speed. The pacing is also fantastic. You never spend too long in one area or level, and the game just keeps going and going and going. And then there's even the 2D gameplay in there with classic Sonic, and that's really great also. I've always preferred the 3D gameplay, but 2D Sonic, classic Sonic, that's some good stuff also. But then they re-released the game in 2024 and added Shadow Generations, and this really takes the game to the next level, and it really makes it like the best Sonic game of them all. Not only is all of Sonic Generations in there, and it's just as awesome as before, but they introduce a whole new 4 to 5 hour campaign with Shadow, where you get to go through some of his most memorable moments and levels. You get to take on Black Doom, you get to go through Radical Highway again and again and again, but the thing is, the controls, they've gotten even better. These are like the best controls of any Sonic the Hedgehog video game. Legit, it feels fantastic. The game has a great sense of speed, you're always in control. The level design is superb through and through. There's not a bad level here, and the game never overstays its welcome. By the time I was done with it, really by the time I was done with either Sonic Generations or Shadow Generations, I just wanted more from it because it was just such a great time. The music's fantastic, the presentation is excellent, the story's actually good. There's tons upon tons of fan service, and then you get to relive all of Sonic and Shadow's most iconic moments, and usually they're remixed in some way to feel fresh. And all I gotta say is, it brings me a whole lot of joy to see Sonic truly on the upswing when it comes to quality. If you are looking for maybe the greatest Sonic the Hedgehog game of them all and you haven't tried this yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Even Sonic's biggest haters are gonna like this one. Well, the furry mascots aren't ending anytime soon. Here we have Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped. Now, there have been plenty of great Crash Bandicoot games, Crash 2, Crash 4, but in my opinion, the best has always been Crash Bandicoot 3. This is arguably Naughty Dog's best game. I love this game to pieces. I've been playing it for over 20 years now, and it's never not been a great time. But what's even more impressive is just how well this game holds up all these years later. Sure, it's not the longest, it's not the deepest, and it's not the most challenging of the Crash Bandicoot games, but I feel like this game strikes the best balance between everything to overall just create the best experience in the entire franchise. The story is whimsical and fun, where Cortex comes back, but this time with an evil mask, and this time-traveling asswipe named Entropy, and so you end up going through a bunch of different time periods, and this not only creates a ton of variety visually and thematically, but when it comes to the actual level design and playing through these levels, no time period ever feels like it overstays its welcome. You'll be wanting more from all of them. They find different ways to keep every single level engaging and interesting. On top of this, Crash has arguably the best moveset he's ever had in a video game. I just love his moveset in this game, from the double jump to the ground pound to the long spin, and it all feels really great. Crash controls incredibly well. I'm not going to say it's the best he's ever controlled because Crash 4 probably has that one, but it does feel really nice to play as Crash. And you won't only be playing as Crash on foot, there actually are some vehicle levels. You even get to play as Coco for a few of these, and these only add further to the game. They add more variety, and I had just as much fun with these as I did with the main game. And it doesn't go nuts with these vehicle levels either. Unlike Wrath of Cortex, where it felt like every other level was a vehicle level, here they're all spaced out to the point that when one shows up, it's a bit of a welcome surprise. Something else that's always going to be a welcome surprise is just how much fun it is to 100% this game. You don't have to 100% it, not by any means, but trying to destroy all of the boxes, it's more enjoyable than you might think. It's much better to 100% this game than Crash 4, that's for certain. The game looks great, it was remade, and that remake looks excellent also, and the music, it's maybe the best in the whole series. This game is easily one of the best PS1 games of them all, and I'll always love it. And speaking of greatest PS1 games of all time, here we have Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon. Now, like Crash, there's been a few really great Spyro games, but my favorite's always been Spyro 3. I really enjoy the story to this game. The characters are just so lovable and it feels magical. The second game had it as well, but really like how the third one hits. But then when it comes to the actual gameplay, this is, in my opinion, the best gameplay the series has ever seen. Spyro controls the best that he ever has here. He has the best moveset he's ever had, and there are some really awesome levels here where they're much more open and you get to freely explore, collecting gems. And all the many dragon eggs. There's a lot of dragon eggs here, and I've always had a great time trying to get as many as I possibly can. And then there's a lot of other gameplay styles. You actually get to play as a bunch of different characters in this game, and well, I know that's not everybody's cup of tea and they don't like how many different characters you play as. I've just always had a soft spot for all of these characters. They all play differently, and I think they all provide something new to the table. They're all engaging, and that's what matters at the end of the day. Yeah, it's not the most focused, I guess, but it doesn't go off the rails like Wrath of Cortex does. You don't even play as these characters for all that long anyway. I enjoy the many levels this game has, and I've come back to it a few times. I just love the vibe and the atmosphere of this game. It always just hits so well for me, especially the PS1 version. The remake is beautiful, don't get it twisted. It's a fantastic looking game, but man, I love the vibe of those old crispy PS1 graphics. The music is also really nice in this game. Spyro Year of the Dragon is one of Insomniac's best, and you'd be hard pressed to find a Spyro game that's anywhere near as good as this game that isn't called Spyro 2. While I'll always prefer Crash to Spyro, I can't deny the quality of Spyro Year of the Dragon. It's one of the best 3D platformers to grace the PS1. Well, the Insomniac train isn't stopping there. We go from Spyro to Ratchet & Clank. Which Ratchet & Clank am I going with? I am going with Up Your Arsenal. Out of all the Ratchet & Clank games, Up Your Arsenal very well might be my favorite. There's a lot of great games to choose from in this series, but Up Your Arsenal just hits really different. I love Going Commando, I enjoy A Crack in Time, and even Rift Apart is pretty cool, but Up Your Arsenal just had this different vibe, this different tone, and the gameplay really was something else, and it's arguably the most refined that the gameplay has ever been in this series. The story is hilarious. This is actually the game that introduced Dr. Nefarious. They bring Quark back, and there are just dozens of great cutscenes and moments in this game, but when it comes to actually playing it, it's a Ratchet & Clank game. If you've played any of the games before or since, you're gonna know how this one plays, where it's a mix of a third-person shooter and a 3D platformer. The controls are great. Ratchet controls incredibly well, it's easy to switch between weapons, and the platforming is just as good as it was in Going Commando, which is arguably the best platforming that the series has ever seen. When it comes to the level design, it's actually pretty basic. It's very straightforward in this game, more so than plenty of the other Ratchet & Clank games. There's not really many open areas, and it's usually an A to B affair, but this doesn't dampen the gameplay whatsoever, and that's because I think they make the most of every single level. All of the levels in this game have several set pieces. Yep, my good old set pieces that you know I love to talk about. Well, this game's got plenty. Every single level does something memorable and different. And the big thing is, it's all good. There's also some vehicle sections that show up, there's some mini games, and while there have been plenty of mini games in the Ratchet & Clank series, it's actually pretty good in Up Your Arsenal, probably the best of the whole series. The combat is arguably the best of the whole series. I love the weapons in this game. The arsenal is so, like, it really takes this game to the next level. There are plenty of aspects that other Ratchet games have done better than Up Your Arsenal, but the combat really just brings everything together to create just such a wonderful experience. The game is excellent pacing, you'll laugh your ass off, and blowing shit up in this game feels better than maybe any other Ratchet game. And so for our next game, well, you didn't think there was just going to be one Mario game on this list. Here we have Super Mario 64, one of the most revolutionary titles ever. A game that certainly doesn't need an introduction and arguably one of the greatest 3D platformers not only of the 90s but of all time. Super Mario 64 has actually held up remarkably well. Sure, it might look a bit dated, but outside of that, the game is still very playable nowadays. The controls are great. Mario, he's a dream to control. Whether you're using that shitty N64 controller or, a more modern controller, you'll still have a total handle on him, and his moveset really is legendary. It went on to inspire many, many other games is all I will say, and I'm not talking about just Mario games out here. And his moveset has created some very interesting ways to finish some of these levels. Speaking of the levels, they're just legendary. There's really not a bad one here. Even boring ass Rainbow Cruise is also pretty great, with each one providing something totally different from the last and providing something rather memorable. Like every single level has some memorable moment to it all these years later, and it feels like this game has been living rent-free in my head for 20 years now. It really is just that damn good. The music is iconic, and I've been listening to it on a nearly weekly basis for like 10 plus years now because the music, man, it really is just that damn good. I love the level design immensely in this game because not only do a lot of the levels feel open and freeing, but there's actually a number of different ways to collect a lot of these power stars. That's always going to be really cool and add to the replayability. Getting pretty much all of the power stars outside of the 100 coin missions are pretty great. And I've always enjoyed the freedom that this game provides where it's like, hey, maybe if you don't really like to get that power star, you can just kind of ignore it, go get some other ones, you'll be fine, you'll still be able to finish the game. But seriously, we could be here all day talking about the memorable power stars that you get in Mario 64, from throwing King Babam a few times, to getting the penguin down to its parent, to the piano scaring the shit out of you, or racing Koopa da Quick, or fighting two hands that totally are unrelated to Master Hand by blood, and the many showdowns with Bowser. Everything in Super Mario 64 truly has become legendary. Everything has. But don't let the game's legend deter you and make you think that it's all hype. If you somehow still have not played Super Mario 64 in the current era, well, you really ought to try it. It is a pretty good game. Okay, it's not just pretty good. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and I've always believed it's one of the greatest games of all time. I'd be a fool to not include it on a list like this. Sure, it might have aged in a few different ways, but I still got no problem giving this one a 10 out of 10. So for this entry, we got another double header, and it might not be two you expect. Unless you know me, then you absolutely knew I would put these on the list, and that is Jet Set Radio Future and Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. Now, if you're unfamiliar with either of these games, you might take a look at this and go, these aren't 3D platformers, these are extreme sports games. Well, let me tell you, yes, they are extreme sports games, but what are you doing a majority of the time? You're platforming. I'd argue that both of these games are 3D platformers, and I'd say that they're some of the best 3D platformers ever. And I did throw them together because they are so similar. It's incredibly obvious that Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is inspired by Jet Set Radio Future, and in my opinion, it's actually better than Future in a few areas. But it just didn't feel right to only include Bomb Rush Cyberfunk on here, so I've got both of these games. I love both of these games and would give both of them 10 out of 10s for very similar reasons. First off, the atmosphere, the vibe, the aesthetic, it is phenomenal. Very few games have been able to just be this cool. Like, I know it sounds cheesy, corny, or goofy as all hell, but both of these games just ooze coolness. Everything from the aesthetic, the amazing art style, and the phenomenal, like truly phenomenal soundtracks that both of these games have, it really just adds to the overall atmosphere. But when it comes to the actual gameplay, it's really great also. Most of the time, it is just a 3D platformer where you're jumping around in some urban environments, graffitiing some shit up. And it really is as shrimple as that. The controls are nice for both games, but Cyberfunk easily has the better control scheme and feel overall. Like, it just feels way better, but it also came out like 20 years later. But Future still feels nice. It's easy to pick up and play and understand. It might just take a minute to get used to. It'll certainly take a minute to get used to the so-so combat of both of these games, but there's honestly barely any combat in either of these games. Both of these games are at their best when they've got you just jumping all around, graffitiing shit, and doing a bunch of tricks. The trick system is very basic. It's even more basic than the Pro Skater games, but it's still fun. And I think the level design is very accommodating for you to do a bunch of tricks and jump all over the place. I actually think Bomb Rush has better level design than Future, and it feels more set up to be a really awesome 3D platformer, but Jet Set Radio Future has some really iconic, memorable moments in these levels that have lived rent-free in my head for way too long. Something else I'll throw in there is that the grinding feels really great in both of these games. Unfortunately, Jet Set Radio Future is really not accessible these days. It was only ever released on the original Xbox, and it is playable on 360, but the frame rate is not great on the 360 version. The best way to play the game is unfortunately dusting off that heavy ass original Xbox and getting the game. At least Bomb Rush Cyberpunk is available on all modern platforms, and I think it's a great substitute. If what you've seen here interests you at all, I totally think you should drop everything to check the game out. You won't regret it. And this genuinely is one of my favorite indie games of all time. Both of these games though, they're just fantastic. Well, Naughty Dog's returned for another entry. I guess they're what you would call a repeat offender, but it's not a Crash game. It is Jak and Daxter and the precursor Legacy. While I love the Jak series at large, I'm one of those that have always believed the original was the best in the series. I love Jak 2 to pieces, I really do, and Jak 3 is great also, but I just think the original can't be beat. I remember the first time I played this game way back in the early 2000s, and I was so impressed that you could go through the entire game without a single load screen. That was so cool. And I gotta say, 20 something years later, I think it's really impressive. How many other PS2 games can say that outside of like Jak 2 and 3, where you can legit see everything without a loading time? But this game was more than just its impressive technology, it's a great 3D platformer. I've always loved how Jak feels in this game. He just feels incredibly responsive, and he's got a great moveset as well. Sure, it's not as complex as other 3D platformers, but I feel like they actually make the most of it here, and there are plenty of other temporary power-ups that show up to keep things rather interesting. I've also loved the structure of the original Jak and Daxter more than any of the other games. This is a more old school 3D platformer collectathon where you go to some massive levels and you're told to just try to collect as many power cells as you possibly can. Some of them you just gotta go find and you gotta do some platforming challenges. Other times you gotta do something for someone. Sometimes you even gotta participate in some mini games. All of it's really enjoyable though. I think the game does an excellent job at stringing you along through these levels where you're constantly doing different things, partaking in different activities, and collecting as much as you possibly can. I just found it all to be rather engaging. And like games such as Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie, you don't have to get all of the power cells. If there's a few you don't particularly like to get, man, screw them, you don't have to get them unless you're going for that 100% completion, which will always add to the replayability. I like the basic combat in this game as well, and the game isn't stupid freaking difficult like Jak 2. I think the difficulty is actually rather balanced in the original game. There is one area though that I will give Jak 2 and 3 over the original, and that is the story and the characters. I think Jak 2 and 3 have much better stories, characters, writing, dialogue, etc. Jak 1, it's a bit basic by comparison, but it gets the job done. Like several other games on this list, this is one that I've come back to many times throughout the years, and it's always just such a good, relaxing time. So obviously I'm immensely nostalgic for it, but even putting that aside, I really think this is one of the best 3D platformers of the 2000s. It's one of the best you could play ever, actually. And it really showed how in the early 2000s, we were eating real good with these AAA 3D platformers. Real good. And when it comes to eating real good, here we have Rayman 2: The Great Escape. Now, there are plenty, and I mean plenty of different versions of this game, but I've always thought that the best version of Rayman 2 is the Dreamcast version, with the N64 version shortly behind. It has all of the great stuff from the PS1 and N64 version without adding too much stuff like the PS2 version, and then it looks and plays fantastic as well. Rayman 2 really is a legendary game at this point, and it's easily the fan favorite of the whole Rayman franchise. It's really not hard to see why though. This game has just always felt magical for me. It's got just a certain atmosphere that no other Rayman game has ever been able to capture. The game starts really sinister and dark with Rayman captured, but he breaks out and it's up to him to save everyone from the pirates. And once you get to even like the second level, the atmosphere is just killer. It feels so dreamlike and magical. But from time and time again, it goes back to that dark, sinister vibe that the first level had, and I just really love the dichotomy of it all. When it comes to Rayman himself, his moveset is pretty basic. He throws orbs and he can fly with his hair, but it really feels like they make the most of his moveset. He controls pretty well in this game. It's easy to pick up and play, and I don't think you'll ever be confused on what you're supposed to do or how you're supposed to do it in this game. There is combat here where you throw orbs at the enemies. This is more than acceptable. I'm not going to act like it's fantastic, but it's fine. And then like a lot of other games on this list, the levels are really great in this game. Not only is there a good amount of variety, but it just feels like there's so much imagination to this game. There's so much personality and life to all of these levels. I especially love the levels where you get on the little rocket dude and if you hit anything you explode. They always have a certain level of tenseness to them, and it was just really fun to go through these levels. The last few levels in particular are some of the most epic levels of any Rayman game, and the final boss, the final boss is so good in this game. All of the bosses are actually really good, but the final boss is a real highlight. While Rayman 2 might not have the most deep platforming, the greatest levels of all time, and it's not the flashiest, I still think this is an excellent game that really is a must-play for any fans of the genre. The game has been re-released many times, and you really can't go wrong with most of the versions. And that's because at the end of the day, Rayman 2, it's just a really good game. Well, hey, here's a familiar face. We actually have a modern game. We have Astrobot, the 2024 Game of the Year winner. It feels like I can't even go more than 2 or 3 videos without talking about this game. And that's because the game is just mad good. It is not only one of the best 3D platformers of the last decade, but one of the best 3D platformers ever. I got no problem giving this one a 10 out of 10, and all I can say is if you're somebody who hasn't played a 3D platformer in a long time, or maybe you've been waiting for that next Mario game to come out, well, this doesn't have Mario in it, but it's pretty damn good. The first thing you always got to bring up with this game is the graphics, man. The graphics are so good in this game. Like, it is a beautiful, stunning video game. Easily the best looking game on this entire list. Like, it's a great looking game. It runs super smooth. The aesthetics amazing. The presentation, it's as close to flawless as it gets. But video games, especially 3D platformers, are way more than just their graphics. They need to be fun, they need to control well, and that level design better be good. All of that rings true for Astrobot. The controls are some of the best controls of any 3D platformer ever. It just feels so damn good. You have perfect control out here. It's incredibly tight and responsive. It really just controls like a dream. The level design is excellent. Every single level is wildly different from the last, and every single level introduces some kind of crazy gimmick, and some of these are really cool, like where you're able to shrink down, or there's one where you blast off Team Rocket style. All of these feel incredibly different from each other, and they all feel just exceptionally well designed. But that good design doesn't just end at the gimmicks or abilities. The level design goes so hard in this game. It's just phenomenal. I really don't have anything else to say about it. It is just superb. It's engaging, it's imaginative, it's creative, and every single level feels like a spectacle in its own way. Even the bosses are excellent in this game. The collectibles are really cool, where you collect the other Astrobots, and then there's just a ton of fan service for not only PlayStation, but video games in general. This is probably the game with the most references to any other video game that doesn't have Super Smash Bros. In the title. When I mean like every Sony game is referenced here, I mean like every Sony game is referenced here. And then there's tons of third party. Capcom, Konami, Sega, Square Enix for one character. The list just goes on and on and on here, and it's really great stuff. You'll want to collect everything in this game because you will want to see all of the references this game has. I actually 100%ed this game, and it's how I'd recommend everybody plays this game. It really is just that great. The pacing is excellent, it's straight to the point. The game just does everything you'd want from a game in this genre. It's arguably the best game Sony has put out in all of the 2020 shit in the last like 10 years, and it's one of the best 3D platformers ever. But on the subject of greatest 3D platformers ever, we have the original Psychonauts. Now, I very well could have included Psychonauts 2, and I think that's a fantastic game, but I got enough double headers here, and at the end of the day, I do prefer the original Psychonauts to the second one, but it very well could just be nostalgia talking. I love Psychonauts. This really is one of my favorite games of all time. The first thing you gotta bring up with this incredible game is the story. The story is so good. It is ridiculously good. It's so interesting and engaging. Rasputin is a great main character. It sees him going into other people's brains for, I'll just say, reasons. There is no bad character here. All of the characters are exceptionally well written and interesting. They all have their own personalities, and they really get to come out as you play through the game. The story might be the best story told in a 3D platformer. It genuinely is that good. This or like Psychonauts 2. Most 3D platformers, the story ranges from like, it's just kind of there to pretty good, I guess. But Psychonauts, it goes the extra step. It's amazing. But the game is more than just its story. It's a great platformer as well. There's really two parts to the gameplay. There's the real world, where you're at this camp where it's kind of more like an adventure game. You actually get to explore around, solve some basic puzzles, use items with other items or the environment. And then there's where you go into people's minds, where a majority of the game takes place. Here, there's a lot of platforming, and you're usually doing some pretty freaky deaky stuff in these levels. Going into people's minds will never not be like one of the coolest things of any video game. everyone's mind is so wildly different from the last that the variety is just off the chain in this game. You're never in someone's mind too long, and I remember the first time I played through this game, I was just blown away with how different each level truly is in this game. One level, you're Godzilla and you're destroying things. Another level, the art style is completely different, and it takes some really cool Spanish influence. Another level, you're trying to help not Napoleon win his war, and I've always really loved all the levels to this game. They're all super memorable, well written, and there's tons of great moments and set pieces in all of the levels. Yep, my set pieces, you know, the ones I love, they're here in full effect. There's truly no bad level here, and some of these levels have some of the most bizarre moments of any video game I've ever played. I don't know what they were smoking or drinking or whatever when they were making this game, but man, this shit has always been weird. It is wildly imaginative, and no other game is able to hit the way that Psychonauts 1 does. Not even Psychonauts 2. Psychonauts 2's got a bunch of good shit, but it does not hit like the first game does, in my opinion. I'd really argue that this game is a must-play for not only fans of 3D platformers, but people who like video games in general. 10-15 years ago, people would have said this is one of the most underrated games of all time. I don't know if that's still really the case. The game is widely available and it is very well known how good the game truly is. And I'm glad that the game eventually got its flowers. It truly deserves all of them. Alright, and the last game for today, you know what, it's actually a double header. We have Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Yep, the Mario train is not done. We have 4 Mario games on this list, but man, when it comes to 3D platformers, Mario's just kind of always been the king. You know, Mario's kind of always been the king, and Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 are different enough from Odyssey and 64 that I think they deserve their own entry. And I'm sure some people are going to go, what about Super Mario 3D World with Bowser's Fury? Look, that's great also, but we can't just have Mario dominate the entire list. I already got 3 entries dedicated to Mario. That's like almost 30% out here. Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 are some of the most magical video games that I've ever played. I remember getting both of these games at launch and just being absolutely blown away by them. And even in current year, I am still blown away by both of these games. They were easily the best looking games for the Nintendo Wii, and they were arguably the best playing games on the Wii. This or Super Smash Bros. Brawl, really. While both of them have pretty simple stories, really every Mario game is a simple story, these games have wonderful atmospheres, like truly phenomenal atmospheres, and they're both pretty different from each other when it comes to that. I love the Comet Observatory in the original, but I actually like the big Mario head also. And as for the individual levels, it really is just banger after banger after banger here in both of the games. Both of them really utilize the whole gravity gimmick to the fullest, and both games have some of the best linear level design you'll find in not just any Mario game, but any video game in general. All of the levels try to feel different, all of the levels try to introduce something, and each level just feels so expertly handcrafted, complete with, of course, my favorite, moments and set pieces. There's really not a bad Galaxy in either of the games. Sure, some are clearly better than others, but I think you'd be really hard pressed to find any bad levels or shoot really even any bad moments in either of these games. I love the power-ups even if they are just temporary, and Mario really does feel amazing in both of these games. He doesn't control like he does in Odyssey, but I still think he controls very well, and you'll find yourself getting into plenty of interesting situations with him. There's even some really great boss fights in both games. The second game even has Yoshi. How awesome is that? Yoshi's great. It's great that he's back. As for which one I prefer, I don't know, I could really go back and forth. I love how original and fresh the first Galaxy was, but 2 really does kind of feel like a refinement on the first game. But really, at the end of the day, we can come to the compromise that both of these games are really damn good. All of the 3D Mario games are exceptional, and all of them are worth playing. But Galaxy 1 and 2, they just hit completely different, mostly thanks to how straightforward and linear they are, but I love them. I really do love them to pieces. I've been playing these games for just a really long frickin' time, but all these years later, both of them hold up. All of these games hold up, and I think they're all worth your time. Alright, that's it for today's video. I'm getting pretty hungry, so we're gonna stop here. I just wanted to talk about some 10 out of 10 3D platformers. I'd love to know down below what everyone else's 10 out of 10 3D platformers are. What are some must-play games? Did I forget anything? I'd love to know. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. We got the Patreon. We got the super thanks. Code word is Sly Cooper, since unfortunately Sly did not make it onto this list. We got the Discord. You're free to join in that as well. We're having a grand old time over there. I've been live streaming to Twitch and YouTube. Twitch has also been super fun. We hit affiliate. Thank you all very much. Anyway, that's it for this video. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe, y'all. Have a good one.